it is amazing in a way that you don't really, you grow up. I mean, I've grown up with a particular imaginary of this particular A-bomb dome in Australia, where it was part of, Hiroshima we celebrated, we commemorated in August the terrible day. It was, I used to walk down the street and see shadows of the, to remind us of Hiroshima, of the irradiated body, the famous imprint. And this was all part of that. And then to think, what's happened now? How quickly
it's very much disappeared from the international stage.
It's gone. It used to be, in a sense, as Svigenberg writes, the two Holocausts.
Right. Auschwitz and here, the 20th century.
Define the 20th century. Now, why do you think? And what has happened?
Well, we were thinking about that on the train on the way down here, the ways in which, in a post-Cold War moment, that threat of nuclear devastation faded, and the rise of human rights as a language, and that coincided with what was happening in the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, through the 90s. So the overall international discourse of conflict and devastation and social justice that comes along with all of that moved on, and it left this behind in a kind of a spoke of an era that had actually kind of faded away, as I say, that kind of the ending of the Cold War most distinctly. So it lost its international resonance. So part of that international peace language that the city advanced in the 60s and 70s took this out of its own context and made it and tried to connect what the experience here with other cities around the world and other countries. But once the geopolitics had changed, then this lost its connection to other types of events that happened around the world, and so the attention moved on to other places. And I think that's really explains about what what you started with by saying you heard a lot about this in Australia in the 80s, but now you hardly ever hear about it.
I think it's also because it in some senses is a blameless. It's a blameless site. It's a history in the passive voices, as been described.
Well, they wanted to rebuild relations with the US. That was critical during the Cold War. So Japan was very much dependent upon that, and
censored, in fact.
Of course. And so they needed to find a language which accommodated that and able to reconcile these events for Japan and make fascism an aberration of modernity in Japan as well. So this was also moving Japan back into what was a modern industrial society that was.
Absolutely. No, I was just thinking, seeing it in this light, and again, it's striking what a beautiful site it is, and it's striking the colour, the pinkness that you wouldn't normally think about, or you wouldn't really be aware of until you come to this site.
No, I mean, certainly in this light now, you can see that it's a bright, well, not a bright pink, but a distinct pink tinge to the top and the brick structure, which absolutely we didn't expect because you see the black and white pictures and from the 40s, and then obviously the academic publishing that we're familiar with.
The cheap academic publishing. It's extraordinary. I mean, as a site, like you said, it captures both the devastation and the serenity.
Right.
And then there's the scars. I don't know. I don't really know how old they are, or if that is part of the original.
The scars.
And the scars of the lines, as it were. I call them scars. The lines on the sides of the building that scar across. You can see these white lines. Cutting across the brickwork. And I wondered. I mean, do you know anything about, how they kind of kept this
managed the preservation of it?
How do they preserve it?
Well, that was certainly the first issue was whether to preserve it or not. So in the 50s and 60s, it was only in the early 60s that it really settled down to say that it was more of a shared understanding and a consensus that this was worthy of preservation. So this was extremely expensive real estate in the city of the centre. So around us there are hotels, it's a commercial district, and there was a lot of pressure on to actually knock this down and turn this into a part of the rest of the urban development. So that was the first level of debate that had to be discussed. And so there was funding that came forward in the late 50s and 60s, and organisations started to stabilise. I presume, I don't know the details, but I presume it was starting to crumble in certain places. And it's concrete and brick, and therefore durable, unlike many. And it sits against a very different form of Japanese conservation and preservation, which is largely wooden structures. So within the Japanese tradition of pre-modern structures, they're all timber. So this would have been a somewhat unfamiliar structure, I think, within a post-war preservation ethos of Japan, and therefore would have presented new problems. And modern architecture, concrete brick, does present distinct problems that I guess would have had to have been learnt and managed. And so it's probably still an ongoing issue of how to. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the climate. I'm sure it's a few microclimates with the mountains around us, and that has a distinct impact on the stability of the structure in surprising ways.
I mean, one of the things we've shot it here with the river in front, which is something you normally wouldn't see, and with the mountains to the side. But if we'd taken the traditional kind of the normal way it's pictured, we would be shooting through the memorial by Kenzo, Tange Kenzo, and we'd be looking directly at it. And what I was struck by when we came here, apart from the beauty of the whole the site, is having been to Nanjing and the Massacre Memorial Hall, you see some of the same tropes of the alleged, in Nanjing case, peace memorial originating here, such as the arrival onto the site, the eye being drawn right to a monument of peace at the end, which in Nanjing Massacre Memorial is the great sort of the statue of peace lifting up triumphant at the end. And a lot of those same sort of things.
But that lifting up is important. You look up and you...
It's also victory of a sword, isn't it? Yeah. But I just
resurrection as well in the city of this is.
But I wonder, to what extent they're clearly talking to each other, or there's clearly an answer-response question, going on between these two cities, which are so interesting in terms of the sort of memoryscapes that dominate. The current, one has just been revamped, and Nanjing has gone through a new kind
major
of
renovation,
a new sort of peace.
with the narrative shifting, absolutely.
The narrative is
strong
now
nationalist.
The peace won through victory, through the Chinese winning the war and setting up a new global world order.
And joining the international
order.
order.
Whereas this was once the centre of that peace discourse about...
China's, in Nanjing, it was very clear that China's trying to align itself with the international post-war order and the anti-fascist, the battle against fascism, and placed itself on that international order in the same way as Japan was doing in the 60s and 70s. And China's now entering the international stage in a way that it wasn't 20, 30 years ago. So there's a distinct shift there, I think. And whereas this one's fading for international visibility, that one's trying to claim a spot. And that very much speaks to what's going on in the politics of East Asia now, the rivalries of an ascendant China and economically, militarily.
Absolutely, yeah.